Okay, so now that we have identified where Hong Kong is, let's talk more about what has been going on there and how this situation evolved. And look at this huge crowd of people. Right? This is part of the protests that have been going on and the unrest that has been happening in the last year to protest the way that Beijing is treating the people of Hong Kong. Okay? Um, we need to keep in mind and kind of take a step back before we get to the history. I remind you that Hong Kong is one of the world's most important financial centers and ports. It is on the same set of waterways, the same transportation route that we talked about being so important from the Strait of Malacca in Southeast Asia. So if you go through the Strait of Malacca in between the Malay Peninsula and the island of Sumatra, you go kind of through Indonesia and Southeast Asia, and then along the coast through the South China Sea, along the coast of Southeast Asia. Vietnam is there, and then as you continue along the curve into the north in the South China Sea, of China, you are there where Hong Kong is. So this is a transportation route, a shipping route, where a huge amount of manufactured goods move through here. The manufactured goods that are made in places like Indonesia and Vietnam and China get shipped through here. A whole bunch of oil comes through here. So Hong Kong is on that same set of waterways, making it really important. It is also one of the most important financial centers. There's a huge amount of banking that happens here. A huge amount of commerce and money moves through this area. It's kind of the ultimate example of capitalism, which of course is difficult since it's now part of a communist country. So how did that happen? How did we end up with this kind of prototypical piece of capitalism? Open market, a focus on money and finance and shipping, and yet it's part of a communist country. Well, it goes back to the late 1800s, and this was a time when the British were continuing their push around the world. They controlled a huge amount of the planet with their colonialism and their empire, and they engaged China in a series of wars that largely had to do with the trade of opium and other products. They wanted into the market. China didn't want to open its market, and the British waged war and won. Okay, so the British beat the Chinese badly, and there were a series of economic concessions and territorial concessions. So the British suddenly coming into possession of Hong Kong was part of the treaty for the Opium Wars. Okay. And at the time, there was a port there and there was some fishing, but largely it was this small peninsula, a couple islands, was largely barren. It really wasn't seen as an important part of China. And this was still a humiliation for China. They'd still lost the war. They were still being forced to open their markets and give in. But there wasn't a huge amount of concern and focus about Hong Kong itself. And that changed, right? Because under British rule, they expanded the port. They invested in a whole bunch of infrastructure. It became a place where trade and banking was really focused, and a whole bunch of the British interests connecting large parts of the world and their empire. It really became the ultimate example of capitalism. Okay, so it they the British got control of Hong Kong, and it really is kind of just this small peninsula and a few islands. That is what Hong Kong looks like in that little notch that we discussed right there along the southern curve of China. Okay, so directly north from the South China Sea, that's where this we're talking about. And when the British gained control of this area, it became a British territory with a 100-year lease. So this happened officially in 1897. And so in 1997, that 100-year lease came up. And the Chinese were determined to get this piece of land back. It continued to rankle that humiliation, the being forced to give up the land. A lot of the people in Hong Kong most of the people were absolutely not interested in being part of communist China. Remember that communist China became communist in the 1950s, the late 40s, early 50s. And so at the time, that the British gained Hong Kong, it was not a communist country, but in the intervening 100 years, the political and economic situation shifted. Okay? So there was all of this capitalism, free market, free elections, and the people there did not want to become part of the more controlling communist country that is China. And so there were a huge amount of negotiations, all sorts of treaties, and a lot of people left. A lot of people actually went to other parts of the British Commonwealth, like Canada and Australia. But they did, the lease ended, and the British ceded the territory back to China in 1997, and it gained status as a special administrative region, or an SAR, of mainland China, of the People's Republic of China. And there are several special administrative regions, areas of China that have some kind of special status. But Hong Kong is the only one that is governed under a system called one country, two systems, which I hope is clear what that is, right? Hong Kong belongs to China. It is part of China, but it has different political and economic systems. And those guarantees that the market would remain open, that free elections would continue, that there wouldn't be direct Chinese governmental control, all of those special concessions and special rules meant that there were two systems operating within China, the part that was Hong Kong and the part that was the rest of China. Now, you can probably see why this is a problem. Right? Different rules applying to different people. A lot of people feeling like Hong Kong isn't following the rules properly. Right? Unfair advantages. That there was a lot of controversy. And so another concession that was made was that this special status would end after 50 years. So in 2047, Hong Kong is slated to return to China fully, so that it'll be one country, one system. There will be no more special cases, special rules for Hong Kong. And the people of Hong Kong are not excited about that either. And one of the ways that you can see that there's tension here is that the border between mainland China and Hong Kong is one of the most heavily controlled borders in the world. People from Hong Kong or people from the rest of China can't just cross this border freely. Even though it's one country, right? It's because of these different rules, the different systems. You actually have to go through many different processes. There's multiple gates, there's multiple levels. It takes hours to get through there. So that is another indication that this is a special administrative region that is not the same as the rest of China. And people in Hong Kong are increasingly concerned because Beijing seems increasingly unwilling to wait to change the rules and have more control and change the system until 2047. China has been shifting a lot of things and moving to have more complete control. Okay? And I'm going to pause here and then we'll pick up in the next section.